Alright, so there are already 54 of us, so let's start now again. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to have another online class regarding or in continuation to our discussion about responsive web design. So I am hoping everybody's already working on their assignment number 9. It says here sa section B and C there are only 9 submissions out of 50 plus, and then for section A, let me check how many submissions. Okay, it says here for section A there are 17 submissions already. So it's okay. I will understand if it will take a little while for you to work for it, but kuan lang. Trabaho lang ninyo pala yun. Okay, anyway, madungog lang ba ako? Klaro? Can you see my screen? Okay. Alright. Okay, again, this is going to be in continuation to our discussion about responsive web design. So again, our goal here in designing our website is for us to design it for both for desktop as well as for mobile devices, right? So still, it's going to be responsive web design. And then this is going to be CSS Grid Layout. Okay? So maybe some of you are ganang tingal sir discuss mo ta grid view before. The grid view is different from the grid layout. Okay, so just to give you an idea, the grid view is basically it was very useful for layouting. So mag-layout ta og overall layouting or setting up the layout of our the overall design or the overall layout of our web page. The CSS Grid Layout is gonna be the same thing. This is still for layout, of course, but it is much more mas detailed. As you can remember, in our grid view lesson that was maybe two lessons ago, the grid view is just about setting up the columns, diba? Katong mga percent lang sa column. So it was very useful for setting up columns. So basically, it was useful for the overall design of our web page. This time, the grid layout is we are going to actually create a grid. Diba? Kabalo mo unsay grid? What do you imagine when you hear the word grid? Anyone? Na line. That's good. That's right. Unsa man? Kinsa siguro maybe some of us have already heard of, or maybe we've already bought a notebook back when we were still in high school. Perhaps katong grid nga notebook, katong naay anana ba para siya sa magkama og graphs. Graphing notebook patawagan na. All right. Okay, so why yung anong kinahanglan ta o graphing notebook? Anong kinahanglan ta graphing notebook before sa mathematics? Okay. All right. Okay. So basically, since in mathematics or in algebra, we were dealing with lots of lines, di ba? Gamata graphs, magamata og unsa to katong x and y axis, unsa pa tong nangalimot ako sa mga terminologies, but it was designed for us to easily, connect the dots, create lines, create tables, so on and so forth. So it's gonna be the same concept in web designing. One of the technique used by web developers and web designers or front-end developers, kumbaga, is to use a specific system that will allow them to easily modify or easily control how the web page is gonna look like, and that will be through the use of CSS Grid Layout. So basically, in our topic today, we are going to create an actual grid that can be used throughout our web page, so that it would be easy for us to control how our website is going to look like. Same thing with our grid view discussion last time, but again, this would be very specific. It's because naa siya column, naapod siya row. If you can remember, back in our previous discussion, we were only discussing the grid view for columns lang, on how we can create layouts using columns. Diba? Kinsa may nakahinumdum be, diba? Tong call 1, that was 8.33%. Dayon for call 2, that is 8.33 times 2, that's 16.66%. And then we are going to create 12 columns all in all, and then for us to easily create an kanang a layout that has specific column, we're just going to call the tawagon lang nato unsang gani nga call, like call span atong gigamit. It could better call 1, call 2, call 3, and so on and so forth, diba? However, that was only for columns. The grid layout will allow us to control how the website is going to look like, both column and rows. Diba? Column kanang magtindog, ana, and then rows would be kanang horizontal lines. Alright? So that is what we are going to do today. So kanus asya pwede na to magamit kaning mga grid layout. It's very useful for adding elements to our web page. Let's say if mo gamata og gallery sa atong web page, mo gamata og mga posts inana sa atong web page, then the grid layout would be one of the best technique to do so. That's why I have included this in the list of our lessons, because I believe that having ourselves prepared with how we're going to design our website is going to be very important. And I know everybody, as I've seen on Facebook rather, everybody or maybe some of you are struggling with the work, di ba? Na medyo na pressure ba mong tanan sa activity? Dahan. Okay, but go on. I know that it's a little bit pressure, but how does it feel? Diba? Ako, para na ako, no, if ma-pressure ko tungod sa eskwela, murag lamay kay paminaw. It's because that means I'm really studying. I'm really, kuan ba? Kana bang, if I'm ever going to make it, diba? Struggle ko sa work, sa activity, sa akong maestro, sa akong maestra, but then somehow I was able to finish it. Then that was very fulfilling for me. So I'm hoping that it is going to be the same case on for you guys. So I know maybe lisod-lisod ato activity tanan, but I'm trying to give you a lot of time to prepare for it para dili pud kayo bugat ang pressure. So that's why I gave you the 1 week to finish it, and even bahalag late nga submission, it would be fine. I'm not really strict with the deadline. So however, just think of it that once you're able to do it, once you're able to do what has been tasked for you to do, then it would be very fulfilling. Diba? Lamira ba kayo paminaw na inigkahuman nato asang semester, we're able to see, makita nato unsa itong kitrabaho from start to finish. That is very fulfilling. Trust me, I've been through that a lot. Bisag karon nga, I'm also studying master's degree. If I'm ever going to produce something nga kanang require sa among professor, karon among mga project is katong magama og mga kanang actual machinery ba, like kanang Arduino. Have you heard of Arduino, guys? Kanang Arduino is like a circuit board nga pwede nimong, for example, magama ka og sensor nga ang suga automatic siyang mo siga pag magabi, inana ba, or naabay. So that's the kind of project that we're working with my master's degree right now. So every time that I'm able to finish one activity, it's very fulfilling for me. So I'm hoping that is also the same case for you guys. So don't think na ang activity ni Sir grabe ra kaayo. Don't you worry. You can take your time on making that. Just make sure nga masubmit na ninyo, but I'm not really strict with how long it's gonna take for you to do so, because I know dili tanan maayo sa coding. So that's why I'm trying my best to give it all to you, di ba? Ang code gi mano-mano nato, input ang code kumbaga. And maybe I just want to clarify that I want to ganat ko ma-aspire mo to be better, because to be honest, this skill, whenever after this course and then you turned out very skillful in web development, diba, hard coding good, because everybody can design a website nowadays because of the CMS like Wix.com, GoDaddy.com, WordPress.com. Using these CMS, everybody can make designs, but not everybody can code to make a design, diba? So this skill, whenever you're already skilled with coding, it is very mahal kayo ni siya nga skill, diba? Swerte kayo ta nga naani nga klase og learning sa atong eskwelahan. It's because ang uban ganing katong mga ganahan mag-coding, mugastos lag mahal kaayo for them to learn coding. So since this is a free education, so this is this is a good chance for everybody to learn coding. And again, just remember that this skill is going to be medyo mahal ni siya kayo nga skill. Whenever you're already good in designing website using codes, then it will bring you to many places, to be honest. Once basta na kabalo ra jud ka. So that's why I want you guys to I aspire you to, you know, to try to be better. Nagyaw-yaw lagi sa sir. Okay, so let's get started na. Again, if you have any questions or clarifications, just save it by the end of this class, or you can send in your questions here in our messages. And allow me to let you know that this class will be a little bit long, because on the first part, we're going to discuss our topic, which is the grid view. Yeah, not grid view, but grid layout. And then next is you're going to do it yourself. So diba, iniwan ko nga last time that I ni-inform ko ninyo nga there will be a live assessment. So what do you mean by that? Meaning I'm going to show you a picture in our screen, and then you're going to do it. You're going to code it on your own right there. Yeah, while we're on the class. So basically, I'm going to show you a grid, and then it will be your work today. Inyong suhiron tong a grid using code, using what you're going to learn from today. Okay, and after that, the next part is we're going to discuss the continuation. How can we apply grid view to our website? So this is going to be 3 parts. First one is we're going to discuss grid view. Second is you're going to have an activity about the grid view, not the grid view but the grid layout. Then lastly, we're going to add the grid layout. We're going to apply it to our website. So just a review. Previously, we've talked about adding more elements. So basically, that was a very quick discussion lang. Basically, we're just adding elements to our website based on what we've already learned about CSS. So adding pictures, adding banners, adding texts, and then placing them. How are we going to place them? If, for example, if we're going to put a text in the center, what would be the steps to do so? Diba? I hope everybody still remembered. Who can give us an idea? For example, if I have a text and I want to put it in the middle, unsa gayud mga steps na atong buhaton? Kinsa to yung makainomdom from the last meeting? Okay, yes, banner. For example, gamatag banner, ganan ko nga na ay text sa to nga. Unsa to, what would be the first step to do so? And can anyone give an idea? Yes, unsaon gito? Pag-adjust? Just a review, okay, big. Christian. Huh? Okay, so first is we're going to create a container, right? So in creating a container, we can use the grid view. Diba? What do you mean by container? Kanang say suludlan sa atong text. So first is we're going to create a container. Now, if you want to cover the entire the entire screen, then we're going to use our grid view lesson. Unsa nga column atong gamiton? If ganata mo cover ng tibuok screen. If makaver na, for example, tibuok screen jud i-cover niya. So we'll be using the call 12. Remember, call 12, call -12. That is 100% go with. And then next is we're going to create a division that contains the text, and then we are going to set the top, and top nga margin is 50%, left is 50%, then it will be somewhere right here. Now we want the text to be in the middle, so that's why we have to transform it. Kainomdom ba mo? Kainomdom pa mo? Alright, let's review that first before we proceed para dili ta maglibog. Alright, so for example, let me create a new style CSS lang sa. So how are we going to ipa-center na to ang, hold on, ganun di man ni matang-tang. Okay, if ipa-center na to on text. So let's say for example this is our CSS. So first is we're going to create a container, diba? A division that serves as the container of the text. Okay, so let's say we'll call it dot container. Ang mura pag gama sa tag-inani ba? Division. And then let's call it class container. Example lang ng class nga container. Alright? And then inside the container, that is where we are going to write our text. Diba? Kinublan pa mo? So we'll call it, for example, h1, let's say, title. Now, how are we going to move it to the center? Kaning title nga word. Diba? So, first is, we're going to set our container. Dapat ato siyang gamaan nato siyang size. Unsa siya gidakon. So, for example, that is, the class is container, then we'll call container. And then, isa lang ganito, para mapasenter siya. Mapadako ang iyahang size. Good afternoon. No, mapadako ang size sa container mismo ba. So we can either use the call. So for example, if you call it container and then we've already created a CSS para sa column, then we can use one of those columns, and if we're going to use the entire screen, then we'll call the we are going to call, tawgo na to ang call 12. Kinumdum pa mo? So itong previous discussion about grid view. So we'll call it call 12, given that we've already created our template, diba? And then, so this will already use the entire screen, and then we're going to set the height to, let's say, 100 view height. And then, ipasenter nato ang h1, then we'll call h1. And then, remember, we're going to set the top to 50%. And then left is 50%. And then, so, ang mahitabo is, ang word nga title will be right about here, pero dili kay siya center. So that's why we're going to transform it. And then translate negative 50% minus negative 50%. So this is kani very useful ni siya nga trick. So again, if you wanted to center a text, diba? For example, in our HTML, the word nga title, ibutang nato dire nga side. Makita ba akong cursor? If ibutang nato dire nga side, then first is we're going to set the top margin to 50%, the left to 50%, and then we're going to transform it and then translate negative 50%, negative 50%. So this is very useful whenever we wanted to use, or we wanted to center or set a text to the center. But that is not our topic today. That is just a review. Anyway, that is very useful for our next lessons, ma'am. Good. So, anyway, today we'll talk about CSS Grid Layout. By the way, before we proceed, do you have any question from our previous assignment? Unsa may nga nalibgan ninyo sa atong last assignment? Gani? Na yung mga nalibgan sa atong previous assignment? Daghan kayo, sir. Sige na, before we start, please raise your concerns about our previous assignment. Pero di ba kuan kanang okay. Oh, pero I understand yan. Niana ko nga kamoy mudungag sa footer. Naglisod ay taon sa footer. Sige lang, we will create another kuan mo gamat na lang ko og lain tutorial for specifically for footer na lang para di mo maglisod. Anyway, if that's the case, then it would be fine, no problem. So let's proceed now. So let's start with, again, just a review. Our goal here is to create a responsive website. So we've already discussed this. We will no longer discuss that now. So CSS Grid Layout. The CSS Grid Layout module offers a grid-based layout system with rows and columns, making it easier to design web pages without having to use the floats and positioning. This is correct. This is correct. When I was still in college, that was maybe a good few years ago, wala pa ning grid layout, wala pa ang grid view. every time that we are going to design a web page or a website, we have to use this float and position. It is very brutal. Grabe, daghan kayo ang code para lang, for example, mugama ka og box diha, daghan kayong codes ma-involve. Mubutang kag box dere, daghan kayong codes na ma-involve. But this time, using grid, it is now very easy, diba? Sayo na lang kaayo ang mugama ka og mga boxes or mga layout. It's because of this. So we're very medyo swerte kita nga nowadays it's much easier to design now compared sa mga few years ago. So again, CSS Grid Layout is useful for creating something like this. So it's really not that good, but you get the idea. You can create something like this. So as you can see, naa siya mga boxes that involves columns, kana, and then rows. So by combining these columns and rows, we're able to place a certain division or certain element anywhere we want. So for example, ganan kang dere nga side is a picture, dere is a text, and then dere is mga links. It would be easy for you to do so now because of the grid layout. So that's what we're going to discuss now. So the grid, if we talk about grid layout, everything that will be inside the layout are called grid elements. A grid layout consists of a parent element with one or more child element. So here, this is a code. This is the very first thing that we are going to do once we are going to create a grid layout. So first is we're going to create a division that will be considered as the container. So what do you mean by container? So, diba kung if we want to mo palitag tubig, unsa man atong sudlan? Paitan mo palitag tubig dito sa pa-refill tag tubig. So kinahanglan tag sudlan katong circle, I don't know unsay tawag ana. Alright, so same thing. For us to create these boxes, these elements, we have to put it somewhere. So the first thing that we're going to do is to create a container. So most of the time we'll be using division. So for grid elements, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a container. This is called the parent element, and then inside our division would be the actual elements that we'll be using for our web page. So again, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a parent division, and then most of the time we'll call it grid container. You can name it whatever you want because this is a class name, but again, it would be best if you can call it grid container para mas proper. And then inside our grid container here are the grid items. So here, if we're going to compare it to the picture on the right side, ang blue kaninga background is the grid container, and then the grid items would be this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So notice that these grid items nakabutang siya sa grid container. So the reason why we have to first create a container, because if wala aning container, magkatibulaag atong design. Possible nga ang 9 mapunta sa layo kaayo, ang 1 mapunta sa layo kaayo. Right, same thing with the rest of the things that needs container. Grid items grid items must be inside a grid container as well. Okay, so take note of how are we going to do it. So first is we're going to create a division. Let's call it grid container, and inside the division are the actual grid containers. Now, for example, sa number 1, kaning grid item nga 1, we can either put pictures in there. Pwede natong butang picture diha, pwede natong butang picture ni, pwede natong ibutang diri text. But ang importante is nakagama ta og boxes where we are going to put the elements into. Okay? Tesa ga record ba ko? Right, the record. Next, display property. Okay, so next, once we've already created the parent and child elements, diba, tong grid container and then grid items, the next thing that we're going to do on our CSS is to set the display to grid. An HTML element becomes a grid container when its display property is set to grid or inline grid. Alright, so let's just do it now para diretso na ta. So I'm going to create here a folder. Let's call it grid version 2. So again, we're going to start with our index.html. Alright, so we'll save it first to index.html. Alright, so well, I'm just going to write the basic structure of the HTML. So I'm just going to copy it right here. So again, we started with HTML. No, we should start with doc type HTML, followed by the actual HTML tags, and inside it, then we have the head, our meta. Let's just remove this, and then let's set a title. Let's call it CSS Grid, and then close head, and then of course our body. So I don't have to discuss this, diba? Since dugay naman nato ning ginabalik-balik ni. So I'm just going to type in right here, expecting that everybody already know the basic structure of an HTML file. Alright, so again, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create the container. So using the division element, hold on, ginan ko makita ninyo while ga-discuss ko. So let me place it right here. Kana. Alright, again, we're going to create our first division, and then let's call it grid container, and then close. So we already have our grid container. Next is we're going to write all the grid elements or the grid items. So kung sa mga ganito atong gamon nga mga boxes, it should be inside the grid container. So we can either create another division. Well, it should be division. Every grid item must be inside a division. Let's call it grid item, and then let's set another name for it. So by adding space, diba? Kay namdamo, we can add multiple classes, diba? So it would be best since for all the grid items kinahanglan nato siyang gaman nato siya og common nga name, common nga class name. At the same time, we are going to give it a unique name. So the grid item would be the common name, meaning tanan nga mga grid items will be named grid item, but we'll have to give it a special name or a unique name nga iya haragyod. So let's call it item 1. So we have the common name, which is grid item, and then item 1, that is the unique name. And then let's just write number 1 para makabalota, and then let's close the division. So we're just going to copy this, let's say 6 times, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then let's rename each of the grid items one by one. Alright, so that's it. We already have our grid container. So we've started with the container itself, and inside the container we have the grid items. So this will be considered as hold on, parent container, parent element, and then kani is child element. Alright. Okay, next is we're going to set the CSS, diba? Asa na ron? We're going to set the display to, meaning grid. An HTML element becomes a grid container when its display property is set to grid or inline grid. So let's check. Before setting the later na lang. Right now, it is just placed, if I'm not mistaken, vertically. So let's open it up. Let's see how it looks like before we proceed. Practice grid version 2. Right now, this is how it looked like. Since wala pa man tayo gibuhat, notice that the text are coming from top to bottom. Diba? And then, if we're going to set the CSS, so let me just add a CSS at the top para din nata mo create og lain nga file. Ang unang buhaton down, and next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set our grid container to an actual grid container. So to do so, we're going to call it, so dot grid container, And then let's set the display to salan ganito ibutang na to. Okay, grid. Alright, so it says here, actually, pwede either grid or inline grid. But, to be honest, dili ko kabalog unsay difference nila, but what I've been using is just the grid, so we'll just use the grid. So, but anyway, it will work, I'm not sure, but it will work just the same if it's gonna be grid or inline grid. But, you know, for the sake of discussion, let's call it grid. And let's see if there are any changes. Let's save that, and then let's reload. Let's see if mauso ba. Alright, right now it doesn't look that much. Right now it's still nagpaubos because we haven't set the columns yet. But in this case, since we've already set the display to grid, nagpasabot na nga ang grid is now ready, our container is now ready to be nga pwede na siyang ma-arrange into an actual grid. Alright, so again, first thing is we're gonna do is we're going to set a container, and then we're going to set the display to grid. Next, okay, so before we continue with our codes, let's first analyze, or let's ilailahon sa nato ang parts of a grid. So the grid containers consist of the grid items placed inside the columns and rows. So again, every grid items must be enclosed to something, and that is the grid container. So here in this example, this is the grid container, muna siya atong grid container itself, and these are the grid items, kani mga boxes. And then the grid items are placed in columns and rows. So when say columns, nakaana siya, and then rows is kana. So mura siya gigama nga table ba. So columns, naka-line siya columns and by rows. So that is how a grid container is going to look like, or the grid items are going to look like. Now, what do you mean by column? The vertical lines of the grid items are called columns, just like this. So if we have a grid, kani natay siyam ka grid items atong grid container, then kani nga linya ha, kani nga alignment are called columns, right? So please take note of that. And then this right here, the horizontal lines of the grid items are called rows. So for example, kaning item number 5 belongs to the second column and then second row, diba? Do you get it? Alright. So for example, asa man na-locate ang ang grid item 6, asa siya na belong? Column 3 and then second row, or row 2. Alright. So column ang 6 is nabilong siya sa column 3 and then row 2, diba? So basically that is how the grid items are going to look like, or how if it's being used inside a grid container. So klaro na we have the columns and then we have the rows. Now notice that sa ato ang box here, sa atong grid items, naa siya mga gaps, diba? So before, for example, kaning grid item is naa siya gap between 1 and 2, 1 and 4, and the rest of the grid items, diba? So these are called gaps, alright? So grid gaps are the spaces between each column or row. For example, this gap, this space right here is a column gap between 1 and 2, right? So these are called column gaps. And then this space right here is also a row gap from grid item 1 and grid item 4. Okay, so these are called gaps. You can adjust the gap size by using one of the following properties. Now, for us to set a gap, diba? Balikan nato ni ron, but just to give you an idea, we can set how big the gaps would be using these properties. We can either set grid dash column dash gap, and then colon diha, and then the value. It will allow us to set a specific space between the column gaps there aside, right? And then we can also use grid dash row dash gap for us to set the size of the gap of our rows. Okay? Now, pwede po natong gamitan og shorthand property, which is grid gap, meaning if mabutan ta for example og 50, we will just use grid gap 50, then it will automatically give us 50 pixels of gap for both the column and the row. Okay, so if ganun kang binagsara, then we will use this. But if you want all the column or all the gaps would be the same, then we will use grid gap. Alright, we'll get back to it in just a moment. Alright, so for example here, the grid column gap property sets the gap between the columns just like that. So first is we created, this is our container, we set the display to grid, and then grid column gap 50. This gives us a gap of each column, the spaces of between each columns with 50 px. And then the grid row gap property sets the gap between two rows. Same thing naghapon, but this time it will only set the gap between top and bottom of on each rows rather. And then if you wanted to set both the column and row, then we just have to use the grid gap. It will automatically give us the right amount of gap for both the column and rows. Alright, now the next thing that we're going to take note are the grid lines. Now notice that each of the grid items, the lines between columns are called column lines, and the lines between rows are called row lines. Okay, so for example, the gap between 1 and 2, basically it's also called a column line. But we are no longer minding, wala taga-mind sa iyahang gidakon. Basta kay kaning nga linyaha, kana nga space, these are called column lines. And then this line right here are also called row lines. Now this is also very important, kaning grid lines, because we will be using this for our design. So this is what how we're going to set a how do we determine the placement of a grid item. So for example, ang 5, asa na belong ang 5? Naa siya sa line 2, okay? So for example, we are trying to locate grid item number 5 kani. So it is located in column line 2, dire siya, and then in row line 2. Diba? So all we're going to set dire ba sa iyang diri nga side sa top left corner, sa top and left corner. So again, the 5 is located in column line 2, and then it started in row line 2. Okay? So that is how we're going to locate it. Now again, how unsay location sa grid item number 9? Okay, line 3 sa column, and then line 3 nga row. Alright? So remember, ang location niya is asa siya ga-start. Alright? Ang location niya, gaina we are using columns, but this time we are using the lines as the location. So asa na to, asa ang line gani, asa kita mag-start, we will count asa siya nag-start ang box or ang item mismo. So since it started right over here, so therefore it is located in line 3, and then column line 3, and then row line 3. Okay, so for example, ang box o item number 4, it is located in column line 1, and then row line 2. And that is very important because we'll be using that in just a moment. So we will refer to line numbers when placing a grid item in the grid container. So that's right. So for example, if ganan ko nga mabutang og something sa 6, therefore I'm going to use the line for us to locate it. So how do we do so? For example, place a grid item in column line 1 and let it end on column 3. Alright? So what does it mean? We are going to create a grid item from column line 1. So meaning we are going to start right here, and then let it end on column 3. So let's count. 1, kani mismo, 2, 3. Therefore, we've just created a grid item that is from line 1 to line 3, and then that's it. So we've already created our first grid item. Diba? So that is how we are going to create a grid item. It's for us to atong ibutang ug asa siya line nga nabilong. So we will use this properties, grid dash column dash start. That is the column where the grid item will start, and then grid dash column dash end is the column line where the grid item is going to end. So here, column line 1, so therefore we started our grid dash column dash start to line 1, meaning ni start ta dire. and then we ended it in 3, meaning we counted 1, 2, 3. So therefore, this item number 1 will look like this. Diba? So make sure to take note of the column lines. So what about if, for example, gama ko ang what if I will place a grid item at kaning 4 ba? I want to make it kanang gikan diri nga side kana padulong dire. Let me write it na lang. Pen. Okay, kamo daw. So for example, ang 4, grid item number 4, I want to make it look like let's set it to red na lang. Kani. Okay. So for example, if ang grid 4, if I want to make it look like this, how am I going to do that? What would be the grid column start? Anyone? Okay. Alright. I say, please go ahead, Kadosale, please share it again. Okay. Alright. Do you agree, guys? Alright. That's true. Again, I wanted to set the grid column for, if I wanted to set the grid item number 4 to look something like this, then we will start from the grid column start in line 2, and then grid column end in line 4. Diba? We are still talking about column. Now, next is we're going to place a grid item on row line 1 and let it end on row 3. So gaina nagset ta og using columns, using this column. So if for example, if the 4 is ganan ko nga mag-start siya dire and then mo end siya dire, then we will start in line 2 and we will end in line 4. That is in column. Now, what if we're going to do it vertically this time? So here's an example. We will be talking about rows now, from top to bottom na punta. So for example, place a grid item at row line 1 and let it end on row 3. So that is the item 1. So let's see the item number 1 in color yellow. We use the same property, but instead of column, we use row. So grid dash row dash start is 1, grid dash row dash end is 3. So for example, 1, grid row start 1. So since this is the grid grid line 1, so this is where it started, and then we counted 1, 2, 3, and this is where it ends. Diba? Same concept ra gyapon sa column lines gaina. For us to set the vertical alignment of the grid, then we will use grid row start. Right? So what about ang 5? Ang 5 nga grid item, I want to make it look like this. Kana. Anyone? Silvano, go ahead, Silvano. Go ahead, Silvano, go ahead. Mm-hmm. 4. Okay, that's right. All right. So we started in line 2, grid line 2, and then we ended in grid line 4. So that is using the row, diba? So nasabot lang, kasabot lang ta? Do you follow? All right. So let's up the game again a little bit. Let me clear this. All right. So what if, knowing that we already learned about the grid row and grid column and grid row, what if I'm going to set the, for example, ang 4 kaning grid item. What about if I'm going to set the grid item to something like this? Anyone would like to volunteer? How are we going to do it? So this time, by the way, to give you an idea, we can now combine the grid row start, grid row end, and the grid column start, grid column end, okay? So for example, if this is how it's gonna look like, kaning 4, how are we going to do it? Anyone? Anyone would like to volunteer? Sige na yun. Kabalo na taon sa ang row unsa ang column. Go ahead sa banal. Go ahead. Oh. Oh, i-combine na nato na. So we can combine this, the katong grid column start, and then, okay, go ahead. Without no. Sorry. All right. Okay. Let me write it. Let me write it dire para mas dito maglibog. So first is we'll test either of the following, either column or row. Let's just start with the column. So we will set the grid column start asa man. Anyone? Unsa asa taga start? All right. So we'll start in 2. And then the end grid column end is okay 4. All right. So that is a column. So meaning ang hitsura nato is gaana na. Now we want to check the kuan pod ang iyahang row. So meaning we will write grid row start, and that would be 2. All right, that's correct. And then end in grid row end 4. All right. Okay. So for us to create this kaning nga grid item number 4, to make it look like this, we'll have to set these properties. The grid column start 2, the grid column end is 4. So meaning from this line to this line. Diba? That is the column. Now we also have to set the rows. So from this line kana, so that is grid row start, that is line 2, and then end it in row 4. So therefore, the mahusob na ang atong grid item 4 to something like this. Okay? Alright. You get sir ba? Do you follow? Ano sayon ra siya? Sayon ra lagi na siya, guys. And makalingaw po siya pod, to be honest. Alright, next. The grid template columns. Now, first is giyon sa man nato paggama ning naatay 3 columns, 3 rows. Alright, so that is then our next topic. The grid template columns property defines the number of columns your grid layout, and it can be defined the width of each column. So for us to create, for example, for us to start creating our grid, we have to determine how many columns do we want. Okay? Pila siguro ka columns atong kinahanglan. So in our example, there are only pila 1, 2, 3, right? Okay, since we have, if we wanted to create 3 columns, then therefore we just have to write 3 values. So in this case, in this example, make a grid with 4 columns. So using this property, kaning grid template columns, it will allow us to set how many columns there is and the actual size of the column as well. So for example, grid display is grid, and then grid template column we have auto, 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 auto. How many okay, since we have 4, diba? 1, 2, 3, 4. Therefore, there are 4 columns. Diba? Diba ang purpose is defines the number of columns in your grid layout, and it can define the width of each column. So, while gaset ta og pila ka buo columns atong gibutang, gaset po ta og unsay size sa column mismo. Diba? So we have here 4 columns, and each column have automatic width, meaning it will automatically adjust to the screen size. All right. So let's say, for example, let's go back to our code. What if we're going to, let's say we're going to create 3 columns. So again, let's go back to our grade container and then display it to grade, and then we will set unsa lang ganito, grid template column. So we'll set grid template column, and then if mugama kog tulo ka buok nga column, unsa kong buhaton? dapat tulo pod. In our case, dili ta mo gamit og auto, gamay ra tag specific nga size. So let's say for example, mo gama ko og columns niya. Each columns have 100 pixels, di ba? So we can either set 100 to 3 kabok 100 pixels. But this will depend kung sa imong size. You can set it whatever you want. So pwede nga ang first column is 50 per pixel lang, ang ikaduha is 100, ang ikatulo is 30. Okay? That doesn't mean nga dapat uniform siya. Pareha siya. But for the sake of discussion, let's just set them pareha siya tanan, uniform ang ilaha nga width. So therefore, our grid container has 3 columns and each column has 100 pixel width, right? So that is the grid template columns. Next, the grid template row property. The grid template rows property defines the number of rows in your grid layout and the height of each row. So it's the same thing. Now this time, since we've already created our columns, we are going to create our rows as well. So for example, if we're going to create another, we are going to create a grid row nga tulupod kabok ang iyahang row. So therefore, we're going to set grid template row. Sakto ba ang code? Rows. Okay, na columns. Alright, save akong kit. So dapat columns and then rows. And then let's say 100px pod para square. 100px, 100px, 100px. Therefore, we've already created a grid container that has 3 columns and each column has 100 pixels each, and then 3 rows and each rows has 100 pixels each. Alright? So let's test. Let's see if mao ba jud. So we are just going to set a background color. And let's set it to blue. Right now, dili siya makita. Let's just set the height. Let's set the width to, let's say, 100 automatic, and then height to automatic, meaning it will just automatically give us the entire width of the entire width and height of the container. So additional lang din nato para makita nato siya, and then this is what we are trying to discuss, diba? So let's see, let's save that, and then let's reload. Let's reload here. Alright, let me zoom it out. So kana, so far mo na yung hitsura ron ngano automatic with is auto. Alright, let's just set the width na lang to let's say 500px. Alright, so we already see our container, but right now wala siya mga boxes because wa pa matug set. But notice nga ato ang numbers dili na siya gapasunod pa ubos. Gapasunod na siya, nahimo na siyang grid. Right now we are not really seeing it properly because we haven't set it yet. But as you can see, ang pasunod niya is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So basically ang atong rows is we have 100 pixel nga tulo ka buok and then 100 pixels each. Diba? Atong gisat gina kay tulo ka buok, diba? So we have 3 columns, and then right now it only showing 1, 2. It's because kulang atong items. So dungagan natong at items, himo natong siyam. Alright, so let's call it 7, 8, and then 9. 7, 8, 9. Alright, let's save that. Let's reload. Okay, notice nga naatay 3 columns and then 3 rows. Okay, so that will be through the use of the grid template columns and grid template rows. Okay, do you follow? Alright. So same thing gyapon ani. Now, what if we wanted to set, di ba atong gibuhat gaina is we set all the columns and rows nga same ra siya size. So again, you can control unsay gidak unsa iyahang rows, unsay gilapdon sa iyahang columns by just changing here. For example, the first one is 100px, ang sunod is let's say 50px lang, and then ang katulo kay 200, and then sa rows ang una is butang natog 10px lang, and then ang ikaduha is 100 na pod, ang ikatulo is let's say 30px. Let's save that. Let's reload. Okay, notice nga mo na yung hitsura. All right. So basically, you can change how the grid items are going to look like by just changing the amount of both the columns and the rows. So right now, let me just set it back to 100 para maklaro. Next is the justify content property. Now this is this is just an additional something that we are going to learn. So before we proceed to this, let's magama lang taog boxes na lang jud mismo. So let's reload this, and then we're going to design each boxes specifically. Now, if we wanted to design the each of these items kani ganadtong lain yang na siya iyang kaugalingon nga colors, then we are going to go back to our CSS, and then we'll call dili na ang grid container atong designon because we are now designing our grid items. So we will call unsa may itong tawagon, unsa may pinaka common nga name nila dire tanan, the grid item. So if I'm going to call grid item, tanan nga mga class nga na grid item, which is all of them, will be affected, diba? So let's call grid item, and then let's set the background color to, let's say, orange na lang, and then let's set a border color. Let's set a border 1px nga solid, and then color white. So alright, so we are giving it na lang 5px na lang para maklaro. So again, we changed the background color to orange, and then we've created a border 5px na solid, and then color white. Let's save that. Let's reload. Here. Yung ano, nigawas mo na siya. Grid container, grid item. Kadali lang ha, kay murag na inawala. Ano, nigawas pa niya to ang box. Wait a minute. Dapat na siya. Pero nigawas lagi siya, dapat siya magawas. Og i-auto na ako ni, wait sa ha. Dapat makita. Ay, sakto ron, sakto. Okay. Alright, thank you for that. So let's na lang, paggamit na lang ito atong border. Dako kay atong border. Let's set it to 1px na lang. And then let's set it to 333. So let's give it 400 na lang sa px. Gawas yun siya dyan, but it's okay. Alright, right now, this is how it's gonna look like, diba? We have a box here. Tangtangon na lang ito ni background color kay maka let's just hide that for the meantime. Let's set it. Okay, so we already created our grid. Makita ba ninyo? I'm not sure. So we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have the same with columns and same sizes of rows. And then again, you can play with the sizes. So for example, ang ikadawa nga column is just 50px. So let's save that. Let's reload. This is how it's gonna look like. So 100, 50, 100, and then same thing for the rows. Let's set it to, let's say, 50 pod. Then it's going to look something like this. So basically, it would be you can control on how the each sizes is going to look like by using this, by changing the value as well. So right now, we're going to remove the border because nakainomdom ko nga namday tay gap di ay daw kani grid gaps. So we'll try to use this instead of border. We're going to add grid gaps. So unsaan ganito, we have here grid column gap, grid row gap, or grid gap. So what if, for example, if I'm going to set the gap for column to 50px, so we'll say grid column gap, and let's set it to 50px. And then sa row, ganahan ko nga ang sa row, ganahan ko mahimo siyang 100 pixels. Then kana, let's save that. Let's reload. That's it. So we have here 50 pixels nga column gap, and then 100 pixels nga row gap. So it doesn't really look good, so I'm just going to erase it. diba? That is if ganahan ka nga lailhay ang iyang gaps sa column o sa row. But if you want both the gaps for columns and row to be the same, then we will use the property column gap, and then let's give it let's say 10px. Let's save that, and then let's reload. That's it. So we already have 10 pixels gap for each of the sides. Alright, so let's set back the background color. Butangan na to balik og background color to blue para klaro. And then let's set the height to 400px pod para sa atong next nga topic. So right now this is how it's gonna look like. Notice that if this is our container kaning tibuok nga blue, asa nakabutang atong mga boxes, naa siya sa top left corner, right? Kabantay mo? Wala siya na perfect center. Now, we can set, pwede na to siya mabalhin-balhin og asa tayo kanang ibutang. Let's say, gana na to ipatunga, gana to i-move diri sa right side, sa bottom, by using this property. So right now, by default, it's on the top left corner, but we can always change that using the justify content. So the justify content property is used to align the whole grid inside the container. The values consist of the following. First is start. This is the default. So to do so, we'll write justify dash content and then start. This is the default. Actually, this is already considered as the justify content start. Now, next is we can also move it to the right side by setting it to justify content end. Alright, so let's go back to our code. Let's add it right here. So let's say justify content and then end. Let's save that and then let's reload. Kana, nabalhin na po siya diri sa end. Kabantay mo? Alright, for the meantime, let's remove the gap. Let me set it back to border agihapon. Okay, on our next topic, border and then 1px solid white. Sorry about that, but let's set it back to kana border. Okay, saan nga wala siya? Okay. Dirita dapat mo yan. Okay, kana. Alright, and then next is we have space between. So the space between, basically it will automatically adjust to the width of the container, and then tagaan niya og equal nga size. So let's set the justify content to space between, space between. Alright, space between. Let's save that. Let's reload. Alright, sa kabantay mo, iyahang gi-distribute ang mga grid items and pareha nga taga niya og same nga size ang iyang gaps, ang iyang space. Alright, so that is space between, and then next is center. So meaning iyang i-move sa center. So justify content center, then it will move everything to the center just like that. And then space evenly. So let's just write it. Okay, so basically the space evenly mo hatag siya og kuan spaces for each side nga parehag side. So for example, kani ang unsay size dire same siya tanan nga mga spaces. So let's try that. Space evenly. Let's save that. Let's reload. Kana. So same ang yang side ang gaps for each sides. So kana same siya dire, kabantay mo same siya. All right, and then we have space around. Let's just see how it look like. Space around. Save. Let's reload. Kana. So basically tagaan niya og specific nga size each sides. So for example, kani 10 pixels. Tagaan po niya 10 pixels dire. However, kabantay mo mas dako siya because naman po 10 pixel ang usa. So, and dire nga side nahimo siyang 20 pixels na. So, basically gitagaan niya og same nga size each sides. Alright, so that is justify content property. And then So, however, the justify content will allow us to control the column, ang column niya. This time, basically, ang murabag horizontal nga appearance ba? Um, ang horizontal display. The next one is the justify the align content will allow us to control the view of the items vertically na pod. If gaya na horizontally, this time vertically. So it would be the same thing. So for example, from start, if we're going to set the start to default, then it's going to look like this, and end na po siya sa ubos, center, space between, space evenly, space around. So basically, it would be the same thing, but instead of horizontally, it is now setting it vertically. Do you follow? Okay. Alright. So this time, we are going to manage our grid items. Now, same thing that we always did a while ago. Atong sa example, gaya na, giyon sa nato pag set ang 5 nga mahimo siyang inana. So we're going to try it again this time. So the grid column property, basically you can set different sizes for each grid item by making it span to multiple columns or rows. So when we say span, mura siyang mulakto do, musapaw siya sa uban nga mga grid items para mahimo siyang nga size. For example, kaning let's go back atong gibuhat gaina. So for example, ang 5 ganahan kong mahitsuran niya is inani, then grid item 5 is now spanning 6. Ni-span siya sa grid item 6. Muna pasabot og span. Alright? By making it span to multiple columns or rows. Anyway, alright, so the first is grid column. The grid column property defines on which columns to place an item. Now, you will define where the item will start and where it will end. To place an item, you can refer to the line numbers. Katong gibuhat kay ina, mo refer to sa line numbers, or use the keyword span to define how many columns the item will span. It is a shorthand property for the grid column start and the grid column end. So remember, gaina, ginani na to pagsulat gaina, di ba? So, sakto ba? Makinom pa mo giyon sa to naton eh. This is how we wrote it a while ago, di ba? Now, since this would take a lot of code, di ba, kabantay mo, daghan kay kang i-type. Daghan kay kang i-type. Thankfully, naa siya shorthand property, meaning naa siya shortcut, and that will be using the grid column. Alright? So, for example, if we're going to write this, kana, pwede lang nato ng, di ba, ang column start 2 and then column end 4, we can just write grid column, ana lang, and then we will write 2, ana, and then forward slash, and then we can either refer to the line numbers or use the keyword. So for example, if ganan kong ganan kong ispan dire, so therefore we will be moving it to line 4. Diba? So pwede, instead of writing it this way, which is totally fine, it's totally fine if we're going to write it this way, but maybe maglisod ta og memorize most of that time. So instead, we are going to write it this way. So grid column, that is 2/4. Meaning, it will start in line 2 and then it will end in line 4. Asay masayon? Kani or kani? Kani kadawa. Okay? Alright, so for example, here, we will make the item 1, which is this one, start on column 1 and span 2 columns. So, we can either write 1/3, diba? Okay, since we started in 1 and then it end in 1, 2, 3, diba? Just like this, kana? Or, we can also use the word span, meaning span, musapaw siya. So, it would be totally up to you how are you going to do it. So, if we're going to say 1-span 2, meaning we are going to mo laktaw ta og duwa ka columns, meaning we will span first, that is 1, and then 2. Therefore, we've created the item to look like this. So that is the difference between the span and the line color. So again, we can either just line number again instead. I'm sorry. So again, we can either use span, meaning pila ka bok yang laktawan, or we can just write the line number directly. So it'll be totally up to you. What do you think is better, using span or using line number? Para ninyo. Mas sayon ang line number, di ba? Alright. Okay, but it will be totally up to you, okay? So once you're already doing it on your own, you can either use the word span or line number. So again, span meaning kabantay mo lahi ang yang number mo gawas, because ang line number will actually represent the line number, but the span is it will kanamo laktaw siya og pila ka buok iyang laktawan. So since mo count ta og 1 and 2, therefore we will write span 2. Alright, so that will be the same case with the grid row. So in this example, the grid row property defines on which rows to place an item. You will define where the item will start, so that's important, and then where it will end. To place an item, you can refer to the line numbers or use the keyword span to define how many row the item will span, and it is a shortcut property for the grid row start and grid row end properties. So same thing ragyapon ani. So since we already have our column, which is this, we can then, for us to write this, we will just say grid row, and then let's call it what would be the grid row? It will start in 2 and then it will end in 4. Diba? Since mamaya itong gibuhat dire. Alright, so mas dali na lang siya. Grid dash column is 2 over 4. That is the column, and maupo ni ang iyang row. So remember, this is the start, this is the end, this is the start, this is the end. Okay? So for example, let's go back to our and then let's set it, remove na nato na siya. Let's add our gap again, grid gap 10px. Okay, muna na siya. Now for example, if I wanted to kaning ang 2, ang item number 2, ganahan ko nga mahimo siyang from start gikan diri abot kani siya abot diri kana. So the 2 again. So the start would be 1, the column would be 1, 2, and then it will end in, guys, again ang number 2 mo akong ganahan nga mausob. Ganahan ko ang itsura niya is from kana. I'm not sure if makita ninyo, but this one kani. So the column start will be 2, and then the column end will be 4, diba? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then sa row start is 2, alright, and it will end in 4 gyapon. So 1, 2. Alright, so let's go back to our code. And then, diba, unsa tong item atong ganahan ang item number 2. So here the item number 2. So this is what we want. So we will add a CSS. We're going to call it dot item 2. And then let's set the grid column to 2/4. That means it will start on the second line and it will end on the fourth line. And then the grid column ba to? Hold on, let me make sure. Sakto. And it will start in the kani mo itong ginausob sa unsa lagi itong row na to? Dili ang row. It will start in row 1, di ba? It will start in row 1. This is line 1, and it will end in row 3, di ba? 1, 2, 3. Again, let's try again. Di ba? Ang number 2 is ganahan ko muna yung itsura. So we already have our column. It will start in 1, 2, and then it will end in 1, 2, 3, 4. However, for the row, it will start in row 1, and then it will end in 1, 2, 3. So let's do that. We'll say 1/3. Let's save that. That is item number 2. So, oops. Save. And then let's reload. Now, or let's change the background color para makita na to siya. So, background color, let's change it to, let's say, yellow. Let's reload. Kana. Alright? So, we've already set our column, we've already set our grid item from line number, column line number 2, and it ended in 4, and then it's started in row 1 and ended in row 3. Right? So next, what about if ang line kaning item number 4 ganan kung itsura niya is kani, mag-ana siya kana. Makita ba gyud sa unsa gyud ang itsura? So if mo ni ang itsura, how are we going to set it? So the column start is column 1, it will end in column 3, and then the row it will start in, okay, it will start in row 3, dili siya column 3, that is row 3, and it will end in row 4. Okay, nganong row 3? Again, 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Alright, let's do that. Let's call item number 4, which is this. So let's call it dot item 4, and then it will start in grid column unsa to? 1 and 3, and then sa row unsa to? 1, 2, 3, 3 and 4. 3 and 4. And then let's set the background color pod para makita nato siya. Let's say red. Okay, let's see. Let's reload. And that. Alright? So notice nga ang uban nato nga mga sizes na nga usob, it's because kuan man ang atong giset is tulo ka columns, tulo pod ka rows. So ang uban nga mga kuan is ma-disregard siya. Since wala naman siya ni-apply kaya atong diba atong gibuhat dire is tulo ka columns, tulo ka rows. So since nagamit na nato ang mga columns and rows, then ang uban ang mga kapin-kapin is mawala siya. So you can either add more rows if you would like to. So to add more rows, then we just have to go back to our template, and then let's give another, for example, 100 px. So that's already 4, and then another, that is 5. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Therefore, nanatay 5 ka rows. Let's save that, and then let's reload. Kana. Right? And then if we're going to set the height to auto, eh para mo adapt ra siya automatically. Let's set it to auto. Kana. Alright? So if you wanted to add more, let's say, rows, then you just have to increase the number of proper values that you're going to add. Question? So yun lang. Alright. Okay, one last thing, di ba? At giset na to og nigamit ta og shortcut. Which is this. Kaina ang pinakauna natong gidiscuss is we can set the start and end using this. And then we shortcut it down. So may say proper nga term. Basta atong gipagamyan nato siya may mong kani. So from 4 lines of codes, we change it to we decrease it to 2 lines. However, in reality, gyud, ang pinaka shortcut sa tanan is we can just write it in just 1 line, and that will be using grid area. So now, kani nga part is bahala na mo suhiron ba ninyo, gamiton ba ninyo ni, but it's just nice to know if kabalo ta ani. But it would be totally up to you whether or not we are going to use this. Kay basig mas maglibog noon. Either you can use this or grid area. So what does it mean by grid area? The property can be used as a shorthand property for grid row start, grid column start, grid row end, and grid column end. For example, make item 2 kani start on row line 1, and then end, and then column line 2, and then span 2 rows and 2 columns. So basically, mo na yung itsura, kabantay mo, opat na siya kabok instead of 2. The first one is the start of the row, kana. And then the second line is start for column. And then kani end nga row, end nga column. So again, the first line is going to be, okay, let me write start row, so SR, and then the second value is gonna be the start column, and then the third value is the end row, ER, and then the third value is the end column. Now, if di mo maglibog, pwede ka ninyong gamiton. You can just write it in one line, or katong atong gibot kay na. So again, the first one is the start row, and then start column, and then end row, end column. So for example, kani, how we're going to set it much easier, then we will say grid area, and then unsa to? For example, kani unsa na to ni mahimong usa ka line na lang. The first line is the first, okay, 2, that is the row, and then another 2 na pod, and then 4 and 4. So this is the start nga row, which is this, and then start nga column, which is this. Again, una ang row, kaduang column, and then end nga row, which is this, and then end nga column, which is this. Alright, so that's it. Do you have any questions? Alright, like as promised, we will have an activity. Now, since for those who are using mobile devices, there might be chance nga mulag ang inyong cellphone while nag Google Meet, mo trabaho mo sa inyong Treb Edit. So I will understand if you will leave, but I will give you 30 minutes. Please be back by after 30 minutes so that we can continue. We will discuss how we are going to apply the grid items for our website. Atong trabaho na atong website para sa inyong next nga assignment. So again, we will have an activity. So you're going to recreate this grid layout below. So here are the given. The grid container, the display is grid. The width is 460. Kana siya 460 na. And then ang height is 460 as well. Okay? And then background color is orange. And then the grid gap is 20 pixels. Kana 20 pixel na siya. Next, ang grid item, the background color is yellow. And then you're going to set this. So pila ka buok columns, pila ka buok. Let me just give you an idea. There are 4 columns. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 rows. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So there are 4 rows, 4 columns. You're going to do it right now. Okay? Kaya? Of course. Alright. So notice nga na 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I will understand if dili kaya sa inyong phone, you will leave while doing this program. But for those who are using kanang kusgan nga phone or kusgan nga PC, you can just stay on our Google Meet. But here's the thing, I'm going to let you upload it. Wala pa din ako napa-upload di ay. Sorry. Let me just create a link real quick para ugasan niyo i-upload. Kadali lang ha. Kadali lang. Magkamasa ko og link para dito niyo i-upload. And then I will give you 30 minutes to do so. Okay, let me copy this. Make a copy. Wala ko katag assessment ninyo last kwansa sa lesson 8 ug lesson 9. Sige lang, okay ra to. Pinaskuan na lang to. Sige. Katong sa 8 and 9 tagantang mo ato tanan. I-free na mo tanan. So 10 dito tag 10 today. And let's call it CSS Grid Layout. And then let me edit. Kadali lang jud ha. Gamar ako link para dito niyo i-submit. Alright. And then add upload file. So pila continue. So mag-limit og 10 MB kay mapuno ako ang Google Drive dayon. So I'm going to write it right here. Upload the code screenshot of the codes here. So first is inyong i-upload ang codes dere. And let me set it to 5. And then copy this output. Sa output usa lang. Ana. So go ahead. Bahala ka mo bahala. If mas maayo nga bisag internal na lang haron di mo create og lain nga file. So if kamo na bahala kung say comfortable ninyo either external or internal nga CSS. And then since it's 2:38, so we should end today at 2:39, so 2:43:10. Okay, I'll give you 30 minutes. And you should submit it by 3 p.m. 15 na lang. So 35 minutes, right? So it will automatically close by 3:15 p.m. Okay? Kaya? Sige lang, sulayan lang nato. Basta for those who are capable, have a capable nga cellphone or PC, you can just stay on our Google Meet. But for those katong mga hinay ang ilang mga cellphone, you may end now, but please be back by 3:15. We will continue our class, okay? Okay. All right, so this is what I've got so far. So this is what I applied. This is the application of the CSS grid. So notice that I have 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4. And some of the boxes are spanning to each other. So let's say for example, ang akong first item, just like this, is nispan siya og row up until row 2. And then kaning nga box 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Item number 6 is also spanning from this area to this area. And then this one is also spanning. So it's familiar, right? Familiar ba siya? Nga layout? So basically this is just an application to to what we've discussed about CSS grid. Okay? So let's continue working on our project. So last time, dirita ni end. Hold on. Alright, dirita ni end, di ba? Itong last nga discussion. So, the next thing that we're going to do is, you can either create a gallery for your website. So, since one of my navigation here is gallery, so might as well I'm just going to put it in here, di ba? So, might as well I'm just going to put it. However, I'm no longer going to discuss how did I giyon sa nako nga nakagama ko ginani, because I'm pretty sure you already know how to do this. What am I going to discuss is just how I went to this. Giyon sa nako nga nakagama ko og gallery just like this. So you might want to copy, you might want to just do the same thing on your website as well. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to open up our website, kani, and then I'm going to create another HTML file. So this time, instead of working on the index.html, I'm going to work with another HTML file, and I'm going to call it gallery.html. So again, we're going to create a separate HTML file. Okay, and then I'm just going to open it with Notepad++. Let me close everything. And then, hold on. Diyan nakalink ang i-link ninyo sa inyong website. Alright, later. This time, you're going to create another web page, but you're going to link it to your website na nga ini-click ninyo ani just like this. I-click na ako ning gallery. Pag i-click na ako na, mo-route na siya sa gallery mismo. Alright? So, if i-click po na ako balik ang home, mabalik po siya sa home. So, right now, today, we're going to have 2 web pages. We will focus on, in my case, I'm using the CSS Grid as a gallery. It would be totally up to you on sa inyong ganahan buhaton. But most of the time, gallery ra gyud gyapon. Alright, so we're going to create this. Alright, so let me open it up. Asa narog akong code. So again, I will no longer discuss giunsa na ako ang hitsura, ako rang edit ang hitsura sa akong page. It would be totally up to you how we're going to design it. But what am I going to do now is I'm going to discuss giunsa na ako paggama ang gallery mismo. So I'm just going to copy some things. Hold on. From my navigation down to the banner. Navigation, the banner, division. Okay, all right, I'm just going to copy this. So we have here the HTML, and then the body here, and then navigation. All right, and then the division. So let me save that, and then let me reload. Dada. Alright, so naanak ko yung navigation, so on and so forth. Okay. So let me open up my CSS real quick, kadali lang. Alright, and then once you've already created your second HTML, let's open up our original HTML file, and then going back to our kaning ato ang navigation, diba? Here on the gallery, I'm going to write the address of my new HTML file. So right now it's gallery.html, so I'm going to write it here, the link gallery.html. Right? Di na siya hash because na naman ko yung page. And then as for the home, I'm going to write index.html. So I'm going to save that, close it, and then same thing here. I'm going to write gallery.html and index.html. Hold on, let me just get things ready before proceed. Okay, makita na bang screen? Maklaro na? Alright. Alright, so I'm just going to write here a comment that gallery CSS, meaning this will just give me a guide kay since magkadaghan ang ato ang codes for our CSS. I'm just going to write a comment here that says gallery CSS, meaning this will contain all the CSS that I'll be needing for my gallery. So let's check that, and then let's reload. Alright, so I will no longer discuss how I went to this, since I'm pretty sure you already know based on our previous discussion. So what I did is kanay nigama kog height gallery banner, my container, which is this gallery banner na siya 30 vertical height, and then the background color, background position, background size. In fact, pwede naman walaon kani. And then I've also inside my banner I've created another container that says gallery banner title, and this is what I did to make it center katong text nga gallery nga word para mahimo siyang center. Just like I said, you will be using the top 50, left 50%, and then translate negative 50, and then this would be the code. That's why I went to this kana. Alright, so I will no longer discuss this, guys, okay? Yun sa nako ni, because our goal is to discuss the CSS grid. Okay, so what is the first thing unsa gito pinakauna natong buhaton to create a grid? Everyone? Napa ba? Napabay tao? So gito yung pinakaunang buhaton to create a grid. Uy, nangalimot man dayon? Gama o container. Alright, so we were going to create our container for our grid. So we're going to create a division, and then let's call it class, and then let's just call it grid container. Alright, and then applying our knowledge with our previous lesson about grid, so we're going to use call 12, meaning we're going to use the entire screen. Diba sa atong previous discussion kani nga part kani. So call 12 is 100%, right? So meaning I'm going to use the entire screen, the entire width of the screen. So I'm going to use this call -12. So call -12, and then the unique ID or class is grid container, just like what we've discussed right away. Alright, a while ago. And then inside our grid container, we have our grid items. Alright, so we'll call it, let's say, grid item. Okay, so div, and then let's call it grid item, and then item 1, and then close. And then para mag-guidean ta og unsa siya nga item, we'll just write 1. And then I'm going to create pila ka buok. Hold on. Let's go to gallery, and I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 items. So I'm just going to duplicate this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Do you follow, guys? It's the same thing that we did a while ago, diba? Same ra. I'm just going to rename each of them to 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9. And then I'm just going to rename this to later on i-reason ra nato ning 1, 2, 3, 4 because gamito lang nato ni siya para makita nato ang unsa siya nga number nga box. But in reality, we're going to remove it once we're done. So let's see how it looks like now. So reload. Okay, so as you can see here, nanatay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 here na. Alright, next, unsa to isunod natong buhaton? Next, unsa lang ganito? Everyone? Nalimot dayon sa atong gidiscuss gaina? Alright, let's go to our CSS, and then let's set our grid container display Let's set it to unsalan kani grid. All right. So once we've already set it to grid, that means everything that is inside our container will be automatically be changed into grid. Okay, let's save that. Then sa sunod. Okay. Okay, na naman tayo grid display. So we're going to set how many columns do we want. So in my case, I'm going to set 4. So I'm going to set grid template column and then 4 columns, and then ganahan ko nga automatic siyang mo adjust to the width of the screen. So I'm just going to use auto. 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Right? So since I've listed 4 values, that means it will give me 4 columns, and then each size the width would be automatic lang. All right? And then now that I have the column, say sunod siguro. Okay, rows na pod. All right? So in my case, I'm going to add 4 rows. So grid template rows, and then for the meantime, para automatic ra siyang mo adjust for the meantime lang sa I'm just going to say auto, meaning it will just the rows, the number of the size of the rows will just automatically adapt to kung sa man gani ako ibutang size sa division mismo. All right? So but anyway, later on maybe ato ning osbon depending on sa imo kana natong hitsura sa atong page. All right? And then I wanted to add a background color, which is let me open up my template again, my color library. So let me open up. Okay, so again magpalaban ra gud gyapon ta og Adobe Colors. And then if namoy na bantay by the way, if namoy na ganan nga color sa Adobe Color, you just have to save it. So for example, hold on. For example, kani ganahan mo ani nga color, you just have to open it up and then click add to library. All right? Once you added it to library, here at the top, create, explore trends and libraries. Nana siya dire sa imong my library. So in my case, kani. All right? So para din lang ka mag-search. So I want the color to be this for my background color. So let's open it. Let's back it up. Save it right there. Paste it. And that. All right. So I've already set my grid container. Next, once we've already set our grid container with the right number of columns and rows, and then set it to grid. Sunod. Okay. That's right. All right. So later, na naman tayo kuan. Atong width is, di ba? Ga call 12 na ta. Call 12 meaning automatic na siyang 100%, di ba? So we'll just forget the width. As for the height, that's right. Later on, we will just proceed with the height later on. But let's proceed with our grid item. Okay? We want to see our grid item right away. So to do so, we will say dot grid item. And then let's say the background color. Let's set the background color lang to white. So FFF. Alright? And then let's set for the meantime, we want to see it now. Unsa yang itsura. So hold on. Let's set the okay, let's check sa unsa itsura niya. Save side grid container sa to ba grid item. Ano wala siya nausob yung color, background color. Alright, it's okay, magbutang sa lang tag height na lang to make sure. Let's say 80vh, but there might be chance that we're going to remove this later on kana for the sake of visual effects ra na. Uy, nga no di siya makita. I'm not sure if connected ba ni gallery media.css. Why is it not showing? Hold on, kadali lang ha. Display grid. Alright, it's okay. Let's get back to it. Okay, and then next is, basta kay atong grid container is we know that we have 4 columns and then 4 rows. Now, what do we, unsa may kong ganahan nga ibutang sa akong grid, I want to insert a picture. But for the meantime, it would be best if ma-fix na nako ang kuan. Kadali lang, kadali lang. Right. Padding, 10px, column, grid, template, columns, bawdi ay, columns. Alright. Okay, nag-column na siya. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then for us to see the grid item, let's change the background color. And then let's give it a gap. So grid, gap, let's say 10px lang sa. Tara. Okay? Alright, nakita na ba? Alright. So, mo din wala nakita because akong mistake is instead of columns, column ra akong ibutang. Alright. So, right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 ka column and then 4 pod ka row. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like that. Now, unsa may kung ganahan nga ibutang dire sa mga boxes, I want to insert photos for each of these boxes. Now, applying our knowledge with HTML image tags, then we're just going to, for example, inside the div class, we're going to insert a picture. So to do so, unsaon kito pag add og picture? We will use img and then src. Okay? Ay mo kalimot ana. And then I'm going to look for a picture. So I already have a folder here. Nana ko folder that contains photographs. So I'm going to insert all the pictures. Kani gikan sa kaning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'm going to insert 9 pictures. So src, then the folder is img. Img ba to? Right, img, and then 1.jpg. And then JPG, right? Sakto ba? And then I'm just going to copy that and then just paste it on each of the classes, divisions rather. And then let me replace it with 2, and then here. No question with inserting pictures, diba? Do you have any question? Do you have any clarifications with how to insert pictures? Wala na siguro. Alright. So again, we are trying to use the CSS grid in adding pictures or making a gallery. Let's replace it to 7. Uy, naku natawan. 1, 2, 3 pa di ay. 3, 4, 5, 6, and then here I'm going to paste picture number 7, and then here I'm going to paste picture number 9. 8 pa gani, 8, and then 9. Let me save that and then let's reload. Uy, ngano di sila makita? Di malocate ang picture. JPG. Hold on, kadali lang. Images di ay, sorry. Save akong folder name, dapat images, not img. Na mo lagi na. Alright. Images. Here. Okay, so right now the grid is looking like this, but since naggo kayo mga picture, di ba? Ni cover siya sa tibuok screen. So the next thing I'm going to do, since I've already inserted my picture, but if I'm going to zoom it in, notice na ang mga picture na ga-follow good yapon siya sa iyahang grid, which we have 4 different columns, and then right now it's only showing 3, but we're going to fix it later on. But we have 4 columns and supposedly 4 rows. Okay. But we've successfully inserted our pictures to our grid. The next thing that we're going to do is, of course, we're going to fix it. We want our picture to be, dapat maura siya kadak-a atong original nga column, right? So how do we fix that? Let's go back to our CSS and then let's change each of the picture. Let's resize all of the picture. So to do so, we'll call ang pictures. We want to call the pictures or the images inside the grid item class. So we'll call grid item and then space img, meaning it will select all the images inside the grid item class, and then we'll display we're going to set the width to 100%, meaning it will just automatically adjust to the width of our grid item, and then height we'll set it to 100%. Let's save that and then let's reload. Kana. Nakabantay mo nang na-change ang atong size. So instead of the picture using its own original size, this time it will now adapt to the size of the columns itself, of the grid items. Okay? And then right now it looks a little bit good. It's because my pictures are same man siya og size tanan. Same man siya og size tanan, but it's okay. We'll get back to it later on. So notice that, or taysa, anay usa ka picture nga wala na locate. Let me check what it is. Ang picture number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Tada. Okay. And then let me set the height na lang to right. Let me change the height to automatic for our grid container. Right. Okay, do you follow so far, guys? No, that's good. Alright, that's good. Now, what say sunod atong buhaton? This time we are going to resize our grid items. Now we want, for example, for the image number 1, we want to make it look like this. So right now it's spanned 1 row below. Diba? Kabantay mo? So how do we do that? So let's call item number 1, and if we wanted to make it look like this, what should be the column start? Everyone. Okay, the column start is 1, and then column end is 2. Diba? 1, 2. Sakto ba? Again, we start with column 1, which is here, and then we end it to 2 because 1 and 2. Right? How about the rows? We will start it in row unsa man? Row 1 and then end it in 3. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Okay, so let's go back to our codes. So let's call the item number 1. So dot item 1. Okay, dot item 1, and then we will say unsaon gito pagbutang gani? Grid. Let's start with the column. And then the start is so to 1/2. Diba? This is the start, line 1, and then it will end in line 2. And then as for the row, that is grid row. Sakto ba? Grid row ba? O grid column? We will start in row 1 and then we'll end in 3. Let's save that. Let's reload. Tada. Okay? So we've already nausab na atong itsura sa atong picture just like this. However, notice unsa nahitabo sa picture, guys. Unsa nahitabo sa picture? Na stretch, alright? Na stretch man siya. There's one way to fix that, and please take note of this. Let's go back to our grid image and let's add another CSS property called please take note of this. To make sure nga dili mo stretch ang inyong picture, let's set object fit and let's set it to cover. So this is another property that will allow us to modify the appearance of the picture. We want to make sure that the picture will fit to the container. So let's save that. Let's reload. Kana. Wala siya na stretch. However, we know na ang picture na-crop siya. Gi-crop niya ang picture para dili siya ma-stretch. Alright? So this is very useful. Okay, next. We want the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Item number 6. We want to make it look like this. So ang column start is 3. That is 1, 2, 3, diba? Okay, make sure nga we will always start with the edge. So it will start in column 3. In line number 3 rather. Column line 3. 1, 2, 3. And then it will end on 5. It will end on 5, diba? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So therefore, for the column, it will start on line number 3 and then it will end on number 5. Do you follow? Okay. How about the rows? Asa ta nga row mag-start? 1, 2, and it will end on 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Sakto ba? Do you follow, guys? Alright. So again, for the column, we will start at 3, end in 5, and then row, we will start at 2, end in 4. So let's go back to our code. So that is item number 6. So we'll just call item 6, and then grid column, that is 2. So to ba? 3 and 5. 3, that it starts 3 and then end in 5. And then grid row, we will start from 1, 2, and in 4. 2 and 4. Okay, do you follow nga ng 3 and 5, 2 and 4? Nagets ra? Alright. So dara, this is what we want to change, diba? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Kani, item number 6. Let's reload. Just like that. Okay? So, muna na yung itsura. And then next is, unsa may gana natin uspo na po ani? How about this? Item number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We want the item number 7 to look like this. So the column, it will start from, ang start niya is, unsa man? 1. And it will end on 1, 2, 3. 3 lang. So again, 1, 2, 3. Diba? And then, ang sa row mo start siya from sa row. Asa siya mo start? Okay, 1, 2, 3. And it will end on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you follow? Alright, so let's go back to our code. So, we will say grid. So many item number 7. Item number 7 mo to sa okay. Item number 7. We will start the grid. Okay, let me increase the size. Okay. We'll start the grid to column 1 and 3, and then grid row that is sa to? Unsay grid row na to? 1, 2, 3, and 5. 3 and 5. 5, diba? Naman siya nilaktaw man siya diri na. Alright, let's reload. Kani, this is what we're trying to set. Asa man to? Kani? So it should change to that. Alright? So that's it. Okay? Now, it would be totally up to you. Once you're going to do it on your website, it would be totally up to you how many how many grid items would you like to set, and how many or what would be the size ug unsa magani layout kamo na bahala. Okay? You can please don't copy this layout. Try to change the layout a little bit. Pwede nyo dungagan yung picture, pwede nyo kuhaan, so on and so forth. And just make sure, right now, in my case, it's okay to look at because I'm using, tanan akong picture, same man siya og size. But if you're going to download pictures from internet or download the pictures from your camera, make sure to use atong object fit. Kani, object fit and then cover para dili siya ma-stretch, okay? And another thing is, notice nga, here's the thing. This is another kuan kay ato na itan-aw nat inspect element nato ni siya. If mo view ta sa mobile view, this is how it's gonna look like. Diba? If nakabantay mo sa atong previous activity, nakabantay mo nga pag atong i-click ni mo mulapaw ang title, muna na itabo sa inyo, wala. Nakabantay mo ani sa inyo, ha? Nalimot ko inform ninyo to ana. So, here's how we're going to fix that. We just have to make sure nga ang navigation is in the front, right? Kung sa Photoshop pa na siya pinakataas nga layer, di ba? To fix it, we're just going to move our navigation to the front. So, how we're going to move the navigation to front? So, let's go back to our style, our CSS. Let's look for the nav. Okay? And then let's set the Z index. Meaning, then if we're going to add a positive number here, let's say 10, meaning it will always be 10 layers above, 10 layers in the front. So if we're going to say 10, let's reload. Let's see if it will work. I'm not sure, but let's check. Nah. Do you see it? Na-fix siya? We are setting that the navigation will be, if we're going to use the Z index and then any number, but basta positive ra siya. For example, 10, meaning always siya nga 10 layers above. So if maabot ang panahon nga daghan na pud kay kang gibutang sa imong page, natabunan na pud siya, then you just have to increase the Z index. Let's say 20. You just have to increase the Z index to keep it on front. Alright, so if I'm going to click home, it should route me back to home. And if I'm going to click gallery, it should route me to the gallery. Alright, and once you've already set it that way, if naset na nimo ana, then it would be time to remove the numbers. Wa may angay kung naay mga numbers. So i-remove nato ang mga numbers to make it look good, look better na lang, the proper term perhaps. We're just using the numbers for guide, diba? But once we're already done with the layout, we'll just have to remove it. And then let's reload to remove the numbers. Oops, YouTube mo noon, dara. Alright? So, isa pa man dapat line. Okay, that's it. That's it for today. And on our next meeting, we are going, maybe one of our future meetings, we're going to make it dynamic. Just like what I did here. Kabantay mo, akong pag-scroll na ako ang picture, na mo gawas nga, na mga mo pop up inana. So maybe in the future I'm going to teach it to you how to do it. But for the meantime, please work on making galleries for your website. So either you're going to make it look just like this, and then but try to change the layout a little bit. Ana na lang. All right? Do you follow, guys, or do you have any questions? Screenshot sa codes. Alright, no problem. Okay, let me decrease. Unsa man? Ga-record yapon ko. Alright. And then I'm going to put ako rang is kato screenshot kada taas na ka itong CSS. Okay, dara. Alright, just I know that the purpose of screenshot, guys, okay? So just make it as a guide because I don't want you to copy the same design as I did because you'll never learn, diba? But I know that you've been because you've been, by the way, guys, I'm checking your work and so far everybody's doing good. So far sa akong mga kita, everybody's doing good. So congratulations everyone. Ang uban gani kay nindot jud kay ilaha as inigama just like ilahang design, ilahang concept. And then ang uban kay gisuhid lang sa kuha. It's okay, no problem. I have no problems copying the design. Just make sure nga at least inyong i-change. You'll put a touch nga inyo haba. Barabag isla na akong color, isla na akong picture, isla na akong context just to make sure nga imuha na. Alright? And then ang uban kay nag-design just like ila. I'm so happy to see it. I'm so happy nga nakita ko mga students nga nigama just sa ilahang design. Like ang naatoy usa nga ang yan koan is, if I'm not mistaken, katong usa kay travel man dagay to, nalimot ko. Basta lahi ang iyang itsura ba. But still you applying everything that we've discussed. So I think it was travel vlog something, if I'm not mistaken. Kato may kong ganahan so far. Yung mo to? Alright. Basta na ako nakita nga nindot. So di pa na ako na-check tanan, okay? Kato pa lang ako mga na-check. Alright. Anyway, do you have any questions, guys? Do you have any questions so far? Alright. Okay. Whew, taas sa tong classes ha. 3 hours, but again, our requirement is 5 hours per week and then 3 kuan na kay siya kanang discount na kaayo. But anyway, thank you so much guys for staying this on our class, diba? I feel bad for all the other students nga dili maka-join because of the internet connectivity. That's why I'm going to record it all the time. I'm going to record everything that we're going to discuss and then upload it on YouTube or in the internet so that you can still watch it on your own. Okay? So, if no more questions, if wala na ba jud? Tinood, sure na nga wala questions? Alright. Okay. Okay, so please turn on your cameras if that's the case. Mana jud ang klase? Sakit sa tutunlan. And then please continue working on your kuan lang. Don't you worry, wala akong mag-apas sa deadline. Basta kay mahuman ninyo before the semester ends. Alright, let's wait for everybody else to turn on their cameras. By the way, ang sa Bais kay palungon nila ilahang Christmas light pag 9 PM. Ni sorry may gabi. Ani sorry kung gabi kay ganay ko mo tan-aw. Gipalong ra pagka 9 PM. Ang tanhay dili ra palungon nila. Kinsa taga tanhay dili ra palungon. Okay, di na mo turn on yung uban. Turn on mo palihog please. Ano bye-bye ta. Miss Bactol, Roldan, Celsa, Rhea, Gresil. Okay, thank you. Alright, kana lang. Sige, let's 3, 2, 1, smile. Alright. Okay, thank you so much guys. And if you have any questions about our lesson, please send in our GC, okay? Bye-bye. Thank you guys. Hello everyone, good evening. This is just gonna be a quick continuation to what we've discussed a while ago. So I've just realized it. It's already 12:15 by the way in the morning, and I just realized that while I'm editing the video for me to upload it to YouTube, I just realized that a while ago we've discussed the use of CSS Grid in our website, but only for desktop view. I totally forgot to design it for mobile view. Well, since our main goal here in this topic, which is doing a responsive web design, our website should be able to adapt to the mobile devices like smartphones. And I totally forgot to do that a while ago because I was so anxious to finish the class right away. So notice that basically this is where we stopped. We've only designed it for desktop view, and if we're going to right click and inspect element, this is how it's going to look like. So obviously it's not really good for mobile devices. So this video is just a continuation, and I'm just going to attach it to the end of our discussion a while ago. So anyway, this is how it looked like on a mobile view, and this is not really good for mobile view. So what we want is we want the picture to be just bigger. In that way it will be easier for the user to view it. So there's very easy way to fix that. And then let's go back to our here's our HTML, and then this is our style.css, and let's go to our media.css. okay, and notice that the pictures are very small because it followed the grid system. Now if we wanted to set it to mobile view, then the only thing that we're going to do is just turn off the grid view. That's it. We're just going to turn off the grid view, and it will be fine. It will be fine for the mobile view. So let's go back to our code, and then let's open up our media.css, and then at the bottom let's call our grid container here. So if you can remember, a while ago we've set our grid container to be grid, meaning the display will be grid. So we just have to turn this off, meaning we're going to change the display to something else other than grid if it's in mobile view. So let's open up our media.css, and then let's call grid container, and then again to turn off the display grid we just have to set display, and then there's other way to turn it off, but it would be best if you can use block. Okay, so instead of grid on desktop view, for mobile view we just have to set it to block. Okay, and then let's check. Let's save that and let's reload. Here it is. Okay, and maybe we can add a little bit padding, in that way it will not be totally attached to each side. So let's add padding. Let's give it about 10 px, and then save that. Let's reload. Okay, that's it. And then we might want to add gaps between images. So let's go back to our codes again, and this time let's call in our grid item. Okay, so let's add another declaration here, and let's call dot grid item, and then let's just add a margin bottom about 10 px. Save that, and then let's reload. Okay, that's it. So basically we've turned our web page from the desktop view, which contains the grid system, CSS grid system, to mobile view without the grid system. So all the pictures are now a little bit better, or we can see the picture a little bit better than before. So that's just it. This is just going to be an additional discussion to what we've learned with our discussion a while ago. So that will be all, and please continue working on your assignment. God bless.